among all of the stakeholders. We will continue to, of course, do everything possible to achieve the stability and security, whatever is required of us. We have provided a great deal of assistance, both economic and humanitarian, during this last period. And we continue to monitor the situation, but certainly not to intervene or to do anything that would be construed by any side as being partial. Again, it's a matter of recognizing the historical nature of our relationship, and also the potential dangers of undue pressure being exerted on Sudan and the Sudanese political entities that might result in increasing the level of dissatisfaction or in destabilizing the country. We have hosted a very large amount of Sudanese citizens on our territories, and we recognize the economic difficulties that Sudan is facing, and certainly hope that all of these challenges will be met. We're confident that there are very capable personalities in Sudan that can guide the country and hopefully fulfill the transitional period.
Thanks. I'm trying to pass that because undue pressures typically is a code word for almost any American administration's actions in almost any situation, including the ones I've been involved with. We tend to go very quickly to undue pressures, but we take those words very seriously. Getting to another country on your periphery that we've talked about a lot over the past few years, Syria. Where are we going now? And to follow up on a question that my colleague David Ottaway has, is it time to bring Syria back into the Arab League?
Well, Syria is a very important component of Arab national security, but we have to recognize the developments over the last 10 years and the subsequent very adverse effect it has had on the Syrian people, and the current situation remains quite volatile. We believe that there necessarily has to be a time when Syria is reintegrated into the Arab fold, but this is in conjunction with policies that the Syrian government will demonstrate in that it has a willingness to once again play its traditional role in the support of Arab national security, in dealing with the internal dynamics of the crisis, in the humanitarian dimension as well, and the refugee problem, and also to show greater moderation in how it regains the trust of both the region and its own internal dynamics. When we ascertain that that is the case, I'm sure there will be a receptive re-entry of Syria into the Arab League and the Arab fold. We hope it can regain its posture and play its traditional role in a way that is supportive of the peace and security of the region.
All right, and you made a particular emphasis on an Arab solution and a role in the Arab world. Right now, as you're well aware, there are 5 outside military forces who are not Arab: Russian, United States, Iranian, Turkish, and Israeli, operating for one or another reason, many different reasons, inside Syria. And I assume that the Arab world would like to see an end to all of that.
Well, definitely, I think the presence of military forces on Arab territory or on any territory is something that we need to avoid. We need a stable representative government that can fulfill the will of the people of Syria, and as well provide the necessary services and the necessary economic prosperity of the country. And we hope that the situation will be resolved as soon as possible, knowing that the complications associated with over 10 years of turmoil and civil conflict will not disappear overnight, but it is a incremental process that we will do everything possible to help move forward.
Sure. We have some questions from our audience, with your permission.
Sure.
Okay. The first is from our own Marissa Horma, who is the director of our Middle East program. How is Egypt addressing the COVID-19 fallout, and especially with the question of youth unemployment?
Well, it's a multifaceted question, but with the COVID, I think we've been successful in dealing with the pandemic from its early stages. We were sensitive to the fact that we were not in a position to have an extended lockdown. We did have a very short lockdown, a partial lockdown for maybe a month, but we recognized that this would be very detrimental to our economy, to the well-being of the people of Egypt, since many of them depended on daily labor for their existence, and thereby lockdown would have severely impacted their ability to put food on the table for their children. So we didn't have a lockdown, but we did provide services, medical services to the best of our ability. Our healthcare system was never overly challenged by the pandemic. We we have about 5,000 ICU beds, but we did establish an early makeshift ICU complex of about 5,000 beds that luckily were never used. I think early on there was a policy of testing to the best of our abilities at the time. But I think generally, and this is totally unscientific, again, we were in the privileged position, I think, of having taken advantage of demographics. 60% of our population is under the age of 40 and thereby have a degree of resilience. And then for maybe other reasons, and again, this is purely personal perspective, very unscientific, but I think maybe also that we have a little bit more immunity being in an environment that is less pristine than it is in other parts of the world, having had a very strong inoculation program at a young age for a variety of diseases. And then environment, we are able, because of our tempered weather, to be outdoors most of the time. So I think that this has helped us to be able to overcome the strains. At the same time, the economy maintained a healthy 3.5% growth rate, and we maintained the very ambitious infrastructure projects in Egypt, and that provided the job opportunities and maintained the level of unemployment under the two-digit mark. So for all of these reasons, I think we've been successful. We've also, of course, as the vaccinations were rolled out, we have had and continue to expand in terms of vaccinations to the extent that we have been able to acquire vaccines. And you know that there's a discrepancy, especially in Africa. But we have been able to get through the COVAX mechanism and through the contributions from various states, among them the United States, that has contributed a large amount of Pfizer vaccine. So the program of vaccination is ongoing, and we will continue. And so far the levels have not risen, and we haven't seen an impact of the Delta variant. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, doing everything possible, and hoping that with developments of medications now we'll be able to and internationally control the spread of the pandemic in a much more effective manner.
But are you satisfied with your country's access to vaccinations?
It's challenging. No, I think it's challenging not only for Egypt but for Africa in general, and the African Union. Egypt, being part of the Bureau of the African Union, has had opportunity on several occasions to address this issue, to apply politically to our partners in Western Europe and the United States for a more equitable distribution and recognition of the need to provide vaccines more readily, to establish production facilities on the continent.
Yeah.
And we currently do have production facilities. We have a strong pharmaceutical infrastructure, and thereby it can provide, as can South Africa and potentially Nigeria and Senegal, the establishment of production facilities that can cover probably the needs of the continent. But the commercial and the contractual and the legal issues that are involved have made this a extended process, and we hope that it will be more speedily resolved, so that the pandemic will never be contained except if we are all on the same page and apply ourselves in a cooperative manner. We're not going to be able to isolate the United States or Western Europe as long as there is air travel and the interconnectivity in the world. If we're not all free of the pandemic, then it will never end.
That's a very clear answer. From Laura Robson, who's a fellow here at the Wilson Center, following the Abraham Accords recognition of Israel by 4 Arab League states, where do you see the peace process going between Israel and the Palestinians, and what's Egypt's role in it? It's kind of a big question, but of course it's very much au courant because of the Abraham Accords.
Well, definitely we have welcomed the Abraham Accords as a positive development, one that should be encouraging of Israel to proceed to engage in peace negotiations. The potential of regional integration, the disappearance of the perceived threat is, I'm sure, reinforcing to the approach towards resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict definitively and finally. Egypt led the way more than 40 years ago in creating peace. It opened the door for Jordan, and subsequently, unfortunately much later, came the Abraham Accords, which is again in the same line, where we believe that it is dispelling the ideas of a potential threat is the way forward to achieve a comprehensive peace across the region. And we hope that it will have that impact. But we recognize and have recognized over the last 2 years or more that there is a lack of engagement on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And we have tried to fill that gap through our collaborations with our American friends, our European friends. And we have also tried to fill some of that vacuum in reassuring the Palestinians that there is a commitment on the part of the international community to uphold the parameters of a peace agreement. So we've established the Munich Group, Egypt, Jordan, Germany, and France, and have had occasion to meet to reiterate what we deemed as the international community's commitment to the peace process, to the components of peace as stipulated in the International Legitimacy Security Council resolutions. And we continue to have discussions with our Israeli friends related to the importance of moving ahead on the peace negotiations so as to finally end the conflict. And again, it's a matter of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people for their, on the basis of a two-state solution. We certainly do not do this as a matter of pressure, but we do so as a matter of conviction. And we know very well that peace will not be achieved except if those involved have that conviction that it is in their best interest to reach an agreement and to settle this conflict definitively. And we will do everything possible to enhance and to pursue this objective, but the final analysis is that it is up to the partners. So we've had in-depth discussion with the Israeli Prime Minister. with the Israeli foreign minister, and we'll continue to have these discussions, and we will hopefully again find ways to reinforce the importance of final resolution of the conflict as a matter of opening the doors for regional cooperation for both economic but also in the security dimension.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much. Here's a question from Hal Ferguson, also from the Wilson Center. What's Egypt's position on China's treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
Well, we again have a ongoing relationship and a historic one with China, and we apply ourselves without any form of interference in the internal affairs of China. I believe the issues related to human rights is an ongoing dialogue. There are the mechanisms that are existent in the Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, and these issues should be again addressed from a perspective of the willingness of each country to provide its citizens with their basic rights. It is again a matter of an internal nature, one that we rely on the competent authorities in each country to undertake their responsibilities towards their citizens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We had chatted earlier at the breakfast about the situation in Iraq, including the attack on Prime Minister Hatami. You have a dialogue along with Jordan with Iraq. How do you see the country moving forward?
Well, certainly it's despicable, the attempt on Prime Minister Kazmi's life. It does highlight again the fragility and the volatility of the situation in Iraq and the need to address all of the challenges, especially the potential challenges of non-state actors and terrorism on Iraqi soil. But we have more than a dialogue with Iraq. We have an ongoing mechanism of cooperation, a trilateral mechanism of cooperation between Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. It is mainly focusing on areas of economic cooperation. Iraq is in need of support in reconstruction after the devastation of the fight against terrorism and the Islamic State. And also it is a manner of, again, reintegrating Iraq into its natural regional configuration as an important partner in maintaining Arab national security. We will do everything possible, both politically and economically, to support Iraq in its evolution towards democracy, towards stability, and reintegration into the Arab fold. And this is not solely a matter that Egypt and Jordan are undertaken, but also in being supported by many of our partners in the Gulf who are now increasing the level of their cooperation and support of Iraq.
Thank you. Another major country in the region has had, you've had rocky relations with, and that's Turkey, both with Libya and Turkey's interference in your own domestic affairs, but also to some degree in northwest Syria and in the eastern Mediterranean. The Turks have tried to reach out to some of their opponents in the last few months. I know there have been some talks with you. How's that going? Where do you see Turkey fitting into this region?
Well, Turkey is certainly a very important country in the region, both in size and in abilities and in its associations. It's being a NATO member. But we are concerned by the policies that have been demonstrated over the last maybe 10 years or so. It seems to be leaning towards expansionism. It's leaning towards military intervention. We see no reason that there should be this posture or this presence neither in Libya, nor in Syria, nor in Iraq. For that matter, it is in the 21st century a little bit awkward that we still seem to be applying foreign policy on the narrative of post Second World War.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We, at the same time, recognize that, well, we don't recognize, but we have been concerned by the degree of efforts to intervene in Egyptian internal affairs, the support that has been lent to the Muslim Brotherhood, which we designate as a terrorist organization, and which is undoubtedly over its history of the last 100 years has shown its commitment to usurping control over the region of the Middle East, whether through a tactical presentation as a political entity, but even utilizing violent means as well, and its association with other terrorist groups and its coordination and help. So we see no reason why the leadership of the organization should be hosted in Turkey or should be allowed to operate in Turkey and to establish satellite stations that are constantly agitating and promoting misinformation related to the internal situation in Egypt. At the same time, when we did see some movement away from these policies, we did engage in an exploratory talks, which I think were useful in giving us the ability to convey our concerns and to request a change of course. And that, if that does materialize, we will be happy to normalize our relations on the basis of mutual respect and non-interference, and recognition that Arab national security should be maintained without any form of outside intervention.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. One final question on the regional situation. When you talk about important non-Arab powers intervening in the region and pushing an ideological agenda, of course, Iran also comes to mind. How are you with Iran these days?
Well, we've never been with Iran for since '79. We severed relations
Right.
and have continued not to have diplomatic relations with Iran. So there's really no direct relationship or dialogue that it exists. But again, we follow closely the policies of Iran and its ability to influence conditions in many of the Arab countries, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Syria, or Lebanon for that matter. And we deem that, again, intervention in the internal affairs of countries in the Arab world is counterproductive, and relations should be based on international legitimacy, on the principles of non-intervention and cooperation. It's not a matter of influence, but it should be a matter of cooperation and maintaining the stability and security of the region. Of course, there's also the threat of a development of a nuclear weapons acquisition in Iran, and the matters of the JCPOA, which was basically handled by the P5+1, and which is an ongoing process, one that we hope will have an impact on containing any threats of a proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region of the Middle East and the consequent disruption of the security mechanisms in place in the region.
The Saudis, who also broke relations, albeit much more recently, are now in talks in Baghdad with Iran. Do you see that as a positive step or a potentially positive step?
Yes, I think any dialogue can be helpful as long as there's a sincerity and a willingness that that dialogue is not for tactical purposes, but is willing to meet the strategic issues that are involved and can remove the tensions and the volatility that has resulted in this case. I believe it is concentrated on the situation in the Yemen, and we hope that it will be constructive and lead to an end to the conflict.
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, we've come to the end of the specific questions. Is there anything more you'd like to go back to, you'd like to emphasize for us today?
Well, I hope I've been able to respond effectively to all of your questions. Again, just to highlight that we highly appreciate the Egyptian-American relationship. We, again, view it as fundamental to our region's peace, maintaining its peace and security, but also fundamental in Egypt's development. We are on a road to economic development that I think is very ambitious. We have demonstrated a commitment to enhancing the prosperity and the rights of our people in providing them the necessary basic rights of that is the government's responsibility, and certainly something that we hold as dear as a matter of a reform that has been long overdue. We are now very sensitive to alleviating the long years of neglect that have occurred in the development of the country, and recognizing that there are individual rights, political, but also socioeconomic. The projects that are put in place and the monies that are being spent in poverty alleviation that are impacting at least 60 million Egyptians is remarkable. We hopefully are changing the scenery totally in the rural areas of Egypt, providing roofs over people's heads, providing sanitation, providing healthcare, providing education, and all of this is certainly impacting also their ability to elevate their status, but also to be able to be active participants in the political life of their country. So we depend on the support of the United States, and we hope that we continue to have this strong partnership, an alliance that can be productive to fulfill the interests of both countries and move forward in coordination and in cooperation.
That is really very encouraging. As a friend of you and a friend of your country, but also in the enviable position, unlike my colleagues you're dealing with in the State Department, for the last year I've been out of government, I can speak a bit more freely. I'm convinced, and I hope that that's the message you will get from everybody here in Washington, that the United States will continue to remain in the region and play the positive role it has generally played over the past 40 years. But it will have to do so in a different way than in the recent past, with more reliance upon its partners and allies. And Egypt, given your size, importance, location, and history, also as the first Arab state that truly engaged with us on a variety of security questions right after the 1973 war, is really a pioneer in this regard. The more we can work by, with, and through you, to use a military framework, but that also works in the diplomatic world, I think the more you're going to have productive relationship with us, trying to do exactly this peace and stability that we're all looking for in the region. Again, thank you for coming and honoring us here at the Wilson Center.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.